it turns out that the right-wing administration in the United States of America will just invent one. They'll invent like a left boogeyman that they must stamp out. Communism. You like the weekend? Thank a union for that. Thank some communists for that, okay?
The third shooting in Texas directed at ICE or CBP. This must stop.
And at the same facility, there was a bomb threat in August. And then in July, a police officer was shot in the neck in an ambush-style attack outside of an ICE detention facility here in Alvarado, Texas. But Harris, there has been a lot of questions about what the motive is. And I think
weren't those dudes vets too? The ones that did that? That didn't get a lot of coverage in the media because I think that they were fearful that would invite copycats too. But I'm pretty sure it was a bunch of fucking Marines that did that. Again, remember, I warned about this. I talked about this even before the election as I brought back historical examples. As Donald Trump was running around talking about Operation WB, okay, won't say the word, it's a slur. I talked about how these kinds of mass deportation initiatives invite a lot of resentment from the local population where you do it. And people who might be previously Republican, people who might have voted for the party in charge to do these sorts of things, once implemented, will have a very different attitude. Okay? Donald Trump was running around celebrating Eisenhower in the aftermath of the Bracero program, doing mass deportations of those of Mexican background, including American citizens of Mexican background, for the record, all the way down to the migrant workers that they had brought into the country, and the people that were hunting down the marshals that were trying to do this deportation policy were the fucking Texan ranchers.
I want to bring in now Tom Homan, border czar, and you have been warning us about this as a country for months. You have said this on this very program. If you have just a moment to stand by, I'm going to play you saying what you knew would happen.
I said 2 months ago, Harris, that if this rhetoric didn't stop, there would be bloodshed. And I'm telling you, it's only a matter of time before there's an incident where an ICE agent is going to have to take a life or an ICE agent is going to lose a life. Being compared to Nazis and racists, that it's going to end with a use of force, that either a criminal is going.
I think one of the quickest ways to not be compared to the Nazis is to not do Nazi shit, by the way. Like conscientious objectors, demands from within to say like, hey, what we're doing is actually unconscionable and wrong, because it is, right? But instead, they are going to stamp out discontent. That's what they're going for. They're going to keep up the brutal enforcement of mass deportations, and people's resentment is going to continue growing towards these mass deportation initiatives because they are objectively violent. And anyone that actually experiences anger against this kind of thing for watching their neighbors get ripped apart from their families by masked agents of the state that are simply following orders, okay? They're going to be like, that's some Nazi shit. What the fuck are you doing? And then they're going to come and arrest you, too, for saying that's Nazi shit.
going to die or an officer's going
to die. By the way, he says, oh, this is only going to lead to ICE officers like murdering someone. It already has, for the record. It has.
Die. It's going to end up with a loss of life, and it's not over. I mean,
says U-Law, it's very rare to see people call you Nazi, but anybody, including especially the most insane people ever, can go online and call you a Nazi, says Marxist Love. What do you mean? I don't think you are around. I don't think you're around normies at all. Normies don't like this shit, dude. It's very obvious. Also, calling your fucking political opponent a fascist or a Nazi, especially post-World War II, is quite literally one of the most common things that people do. I would go so far as to say that normies experience this kind of discontent towards the administration and are more willing to say this is fascist, this is unacceptable, than people calling me a fucking terrorist in the real world as opposed to online. Especially because the fault lines in which people call me a terrorist are on an issue that has swung societal attitudes dramatically in my direction. Can you imagine an average person turning around and being like, oh, you oppose Israel's genocide? You're a terrorist? Especially now in broad daylight in public? Nobody's fucking doing that. That's ridiculous. Once again, the question I have is this. Do you think the average person looks to what the administration is doing with these mass deportations and goes, I thought these were, rapist decapitators that were getting apprehended. I'm only seeing a bunch of dudes that work in the fucking fields and dudes getting packed up at Home Depot for wanting to work a construction job for pennies on the fucking dollar. Where are the serial killers that you guys are apprehending? This is fucked up. I see that a lot more common. What do you think is more common in the normie sphere? People looking at that and going, that seems like some fucking Nazi shit. Or people running around being like, oh, you oppose Israel? You're a terrorist. What do you think is more common? Discontent towards the administration for specifically its mass deportation policies, or discontent towards those who criticize Israel for doing a genocide? Look no further than the polls to realize that the popular support is both against the administration on ICE and also against the administration and its unlimited loyalty demonstrated to Israel as it conducts a genocide.
And then now the new chapter of a detainee being the person who was killed and another detainee, a couple of them wounded in all of this. Your first reaction?
I wish I was wrong. But I've seen this movie before. I've been doing this, Harris, since 1984. I got over 4 decades doing this job. And I've seen this movie before. I've never seen it this bad. But, the rhetoric is what's causing all this hate, and it convinces that small percentage on the left that hate ICE to take action. When they have a congressman or someone that ran for vice president of the United States comparing ICE to Nazis, that gives some of these nuts, emboldens them to take action. And there's been 3 shootings in Texas alone. There was a gunman that showed up at a Border Patrol facility and started shooting at them. He picked the wrong facility. He picked a SWAT facility, and those officers ended up taking his life. Then there's a shooting just south of Dallas where they attacked an ICE facility and 1 officer was shot in the neck. Then this latest incident. This is based on hate that's being fueled by the media and members of Congress and governors and mayors. You played it on your show. We got to stop. ICE agents are enforcing the law Congress enacted. If you don't like what ICE is doing, then go tell Congress, because they wrote the laws that ICE is obligated and took an oath to enforce. They're making this country safe again. Every day they take a public safety threat or a national security threat off the street, it makes that community safer. All these politicians and mayors and governors should be calling President Trump and thanking them for making their community safe again.
You know, the president has been talking about the high numbers of people that you all are looking at, and this was a processing center, or is, in Dallas, and that's kind of the last step before many of them will be kicked out of the country because they came here illegally.
Again, they can't even speak to the humanity of those who were shot and are critically injured or killed. Because if they do, then all of a sudden it's like, well, you were chaining them. You know what I mean? It's so crazy. It's such a strange environment that we're in, where like this dude ended up shooting and killing a detained migrant. This dude ended up shooting and killing a detained migrant that was like kidnapped by ICE. And because on the one hand, the higher priority here is to justify that mass apprehension, mass detention, mass kidnapping initiative, you can't recognize the humanity of those who were slain. But also on the other hand, you want to really hype up this incident of political violence. And a part of that requires you to talk about the humanity of those who were slain. There's 2 different priorities here. On the one hand, they want to fucking stamp out any sort of political dissent, and therefore they want to make this like a broad leftist initiative. But on the other hand, because the people that this dude shot and killed were detained people who deserve the violence in the eyes of the administration, right? Maybe not that degree of violence, but even if that degree of violence does take place inevitably when they're in like an El Salvador detention facility or whatnot, it's still justifiable in their eyes because like they came here illegally. What are you talking about? They're clearly obsessed someone was killed. Really? When someone is killed, you turn around and go, they're an illegal alien. We are so sad that this illegal alien that we detained and basically put in chains was murdered. It feels like that's a bit of a conflict there, no?
Those numbers, are they higher than what we thought? Like, where are we in the numbers of people that you are looking for right now?
Well, look, last time I looked, we're at about 600.
I agree with the czar. This won't end well at all. Once the left gains power, the right will be the one shooting for not agreeing with the way since things are handled. Not good for anyone, to be honest. I like that we are just avoiding talking about the current existing system of violence that's taking place. We're fantasizing about hypothetical violence that might come in the aftermath of like left seizing power somehow and then dramatically restructuring American society in this left vision. And then there will be right-wing violence that takes place. The mind of a centrist is incredible to me, okay? Dog, the majority of times it's still the right, whether they're in power or out of power, whether the victim is a right-wing figure or not, the majority of times it's still the right doing the violence. Not that it matters ultimately. I think like this kind of back and forth on like where this political violence is coming from, I find to be a silly, foolhardy endeavor, because violence is a constant in American politics, both at the systemic level, but also certainly decentralized acts of violence as well. But, you know, even if you were to look at it from the point of ideology, like who is doing the violence, who's doing political acts of violence, who's responsible for a large share of domestic terror, for example, it's overwhelmingly far-right anti-government extremists.
100,000 illegal aliens with a criminal history walking the streets of this nation, mostly because of sanctuary cities. So they are the priority, right? Mm-hmm. So we're looking for them first. Worse is always first, but in sanctuary cities, if they're going to force us in the community to find a bad guy, and we find them with others, they're coming too. So sanctuary cities are...
It turns out in the absence of like a unified left opposition that is like very well organized and engaging in acts of like labor militancy, for example, or even engaging in acts of violence as like the KPD did during the Nazis' rise to power, it turns out that the right-wing administration in the United States of America will just invent one. They'll invent like a left boogeyman that they must stamp out. And in the absence of any sort of counter message from the left flank party, okay, the liberals, the Democrats, they can just get away with lying. They can get away with building a villainous force, even when all evidence presents the exact opposite reality. But remember, this is, I always repeat this, and it's really important. It's actually a big part of what I talk to the New York Times about, is that right-wingers can get away with violent political rhetoric by simply pointing to the pre-existing systematic forms of discrimination that have been normalized. That's why they don't have to be like, you got to take matters into your own hands and start fighting back or anything like that. No one has to ever say that. Ben Shapiro can run around and simply present the existing form of violence, like whether it be ICE deportations or whether it be police brutality that disproportionately targets black and brown communities and underserved neighborhoods, poor communities, and say, we want more of that. And broader societal attitudes do not automatically read that as someone demanding more violence. During the Jim Crow era, for example, you could look at the unjustifiable practice of segregation, an inherently violent practice that had inherently violent outcomes. And as long as you were not demanding lynchings, or even in some instances you could demand retribution of the sort, it was not seen by broader society as someone demanding more violence. It was seen as someone that was demanding the systems to exist in the exact same way. But if you said, we have to fight back against this, then you could be presented as someone who is actually violent. You're going against the existing law. Why wouldn't you want separate but equal? I mean, equality, it's right there in the name. It's separate but equal, right?
Saying, well, they're arresting non-criminals because you forced us into the neighborhood to find that guy. And when we find them many times with others, we're not going to turn our back. We're not going to enforce the law that Congress enacted. We're not going to uphold the oath we took. If you want less collateral arrests, then let us in the damn jail. We're safe for the agent, it's safe for the alien, and it's safe for the community. But they won't do it. Look,
we were always careful with the Nazi comparisons here in Germany for a reason, because there are levels to oppression and right-wing ideology, but the shit going down in the U.S. literally goes by the Nazi handbook. Not only the rhetoric, but the whole ideological skeleton. And this Horst Wessel shit with Kirk proves the point again. ICE literally behaves like the SA. Oh, for sure. And like, remember, just as the Nazis did, they obviously exist within the confines of reason when they're expanding on the permission structure of violence. They're not going to immediately be like, every liberal that says you should be nice to gay people are my op. They're not going to immediately. The Nazis never went around being like, we're evil and we love doing evil, and that's why we want to apprehend all socialists and all communists and all Jews because they're nice. They don't present it. They didn't present it like that. They went through a process of steady dehumanizing and really escalating the tensions, claiming that these guys were actually responsible for so much terror, so much bloodshed, that the communists were an extremist force that was causing so much terror in the hearts and minds of the public, and they must be excised with state violence. Right? They presented it ahead of time. They presented it as like the reasonable position. People have such a funny black and white understanding of like fascism and how it develops and how the out groups are presented and how the in group is presented, because we have like, I guess the hindsight bias here. Like we assume that the Nazis were just like, hello, we are the bad guys. We love doing bad shit. All of our opponents, they are the good guys. They love doing good shit. But because we are the bad guys, we are going to do bad things to them. That's not how that works. That's never how it's worked. There has never been a system of violence that was enforced and defended by those in positions of power while simultaneously recognizing that they're bad. Of course.
Throughout my career, I buried Border Patrol agents. I buried ICE agents. I've handed too many folded flags to spouses and children of those that died in line of duty. For God's sake, stop the rhetoric. Let's sit down and talk. But you can't keep attacking these men and women. They're patriots.
Okay, for God's sake, I'm turning into Tom Homan. For God's sake, stop mass deportations. Stop mass apprehensions. It is unjustifiable. It is evil. It is violent. Please stop it. We say it all the time. Nobody listens. Please stop it. Please. It's just like, oh, why don't we just debate it? It's like, what can we debate? Nobody's listening. It's not like there isn't mass discontent against this sort of stuff. There is. You know what I mean? It's like there are polls conducted on this, okay? This was Trump's most popular policy, okay? And once implemented, very quickly, especially in areas where it was implemented by force, people didn't like it. Even people who voted for Trump didn't like it. Why? Because it was built on a mountain of lies. The notion that like undocumented migrants were responsible for a large share of crimes on U.S. soil was a lie. It was the actual opposite of reality, okay? And the extra silly notion that when these undocumented migrants were doing crimes, that they would not get apprehended and subsequently deported in the previous woke administration was such a fucking laughable lie that I'm shocked that people even entertain that, even for a brief moment. Like, what an insane thing. All the cops, all the ICE agents, all the people, all the judges under the Biden administration were like, oh my God, are you a Guatemalan migrant? Well, we caught you red-handed, you decapitated children, but we simply can't do anything about it. You're free to go and decapitate more children. Like, that's an insane fucking narrative. That is an insane narrative that they designed. And in the absence of no pushback from the left flank, in the absence of no pushback from the Democrats ever on these silly ass fucking narratives, of course, the administration came to power and was like, there's the serious thing happening. There's the serious thing happening. Guatemalans are mass decapitating children. We have to fucking deport all these serious criminals that were previously left undeported by the woke Brandon administration. Okay. And then people very quickly realized that was not the case. Why are you deporting a gay Venezuelan barber? Why are you deporting a guy who's just working construction, who's a fucking union member? Those guys didn't do shit. I thought this was the violent rapist decapitators that were being deported. Turns out none of these motherfuckers have done that. None of these motherfuckers have done that. So when people realize that that's just a lie, they get resentful. They get angry. They go, oh, okay, well, I was duped. It's a very hard thing for a lot of people to come to terms with, by the way, right? There's this attitude of sunk costs, or there's this cult-like attitude almost where you just cannot come to terms with the fact that you were duped. Nobody wants to feel stupid. Nobody wants to feel silly. Nobody wants to feel like they were made a fool of the administration. So some people do double down on it. But many others, once they actually see the policies of deportation in their neighborhoods, they very quickly grow distaste for said policies. They very quickly realize this wasn't what I thought it was going to look like. And when that happens, they turn around and they say, fuck ICE. I don't want this to happen. This is ridiculous. They experience buyer's remorse. And when they experience buyer's remorse, they go out and they protest. First, they call up their congresspersons. There is no ability to actually make your congresspersons listen to your quite reasonable demands, obviously. There is it seems like we are just unilaterally being controlled by the White House at this point. So much for the separation of powers. It doesn't fucking really exist anymore. Trump can do whatever the fuck he wants, and people just kind of go along with it, right? So then that discontent grows. That anger grows. That resentment grows. And then the protests grow. And then people say, fuck ICE. More and more people start saying, fuck ICE. Fuck the administration. Fuck Trump. You're behaving like a Nazi. And in that process, under a normal theoretical democratic governance, right, the people in power are supposed to look at that discontent and go, oh shit, we're losing the broad popular mandate that we won. Okay, well, even though they didn't really win broad popular mandate, obviously. But we're losing even our own fans here. We got to do something about it. We got to change our attitude. But as long as they don't do that, and they just keep focusing on those who are saying fuck ICE, or those who are saying fuck this administration, this is not democracy, as long as they try to silence those people, the discontent will only continue to grow.
Their moms and dads too. And I want to see every one of them go home to their families every night. And I pray for.
It doesn't help that people come to terms with being wrong when liberals go around and scold them and say, see, I was right, stupid, and you deserve what you voted for. That's why I don't do that. That's why I don't do that. I never do that. I don't do that about Israel. I don't do that about anything. Because that's not productive. Okay? That's not a productive way to approach this situation. We need the numbers. You shit on everyone. What do you mean? No. When have I ever shat on someone who has experienced a change of heart? As a matter of fact, I even yelled at liberals in the immediate aftermath of the election that turned around and said, oh, now I'm calling ICE on my neighbors that voted for Trump that have undocumented relatives. I said that was ridiculous. I said that they were playing the role of little fascists. I talked about the hypocrisy. I talked about the violence that they take on and how little they clearly gave a shit about this kind of violence taking place. I know people were being passionate, tensions were high and whatnot. But I've told you over and over again, having a principled stance on these issues and wanting to make change in a society that refuses to change, in in systems that refuse to actually to change in the positive direction, you need all the numbers. You need all the numbers you can get. That's why I always try to preach to this audience to be more tolerant of those who in the past have exhibited intolerance, right? So a big part of my argument is a big part of my advocacy. You can be a little bit critical of people's intentions as, you know, attitude shift, especially those with a lot of influence, right? Having said that, however, it's still important, especially when you're talking to regular people in the real world, it's still important to be as accepting of those who have actually changed their minds on these sorts of things, no matter how vicious they might have come across initially. Because we need them. We need them. We need everyone.